It's Thursday, April 11th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball after missing Tuesday's episode. My apologies again. Said it on Twitter. My apologies again for that. All on me. It is what it is. We will make up that show with Thor Nystrom on the quarterback lurker teams. We'll talk about that probably a little bit closer to the draft. We will get that episode in the can, but we did miss it this week. So apologies for that. But with that being said, again, hell of a day to talk ball, and I'm excited to do that. And joining me to do a little ball talking here is the one and only Charles McDonald. Charles, we are 2 weeks away from night one of the NFL draft. You ready or what?
Yeah, I'm ready. I hate this time of year. I feel like today, I should say usually, but like usually there's nothing to talk about, in this portion of the NFL calendar. Because there's just so much downtime between like that first and second wave of free agency where it's like guys that you give a shit about who are signing big deals, and it's kind of like, oh wow, this is interesting, and then you don't get to do anything for like a month until the draft starts. So I think there's been a lot of fatigue. I'm so tired. Like I've reached my limit of quarterback discussion. I don't care anymore. There's too much going on. So let's just get to the draft. And I would just behoove the NFL to think, why don't you move the draft to mid-April? Why not? Why couldn't it be today?
I do have some mixed feelings on this topic because I'm with you that generally I'm definitely over the who's the wide receiver one in this class debate. Like that was interesting like 2 months ago. It's really not that interesting anymore, because just the grades are close enough. Definitely, I think there's been prospect fatigue at that position. I think there's been prospect fatigue at the quarterback position. That being said, man, like the other part of me needs the time. Like I need the time to get more receivers charted. Like my biggest fear in the world, Charles, is that, by the way, I'll break the news here now. Yahoo's having a live draft show this year. I will be a part of it. More details to come on that. We're not going to share details on this podcast, but more details to come on that probably next week. But I'm going to be a part of that show. And my biggest fear in life right now, Charles, is that I'm going to be sitting there on night 2 during the 3rd round, and our boy Fitz is going to toss me some receiver pick that I've not charted, right? Because this is such a deep class. So again, for my personal reasons, I do probably need like maybe 1 more week to feel fully prepped for the receiver class at least. But yeah, I'm with you that we could probably move this whole proceeding up a little bit.
Well, when someone asks you something like that and you don't know, you just start lying, right? Like, come on. Yeah. Adonai Mitchell, 6'4", 200 pounds, great contested catch guy. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've seen him play, but
he's someone I've got a full report on. But yeah, right. Like just
if you
list off the height and weight, the school,
right. If you give me height, weight, speed, school, I can manufacture a scouting report and wiggle my way out of that.
Well, on that note, hopefully you don't do that on this show, because this is part 2 of our wide receiver prospect preview. And we've still got some really good players to cover here. Our last prospect preview, Charles, we dove into the first part of the wide receiver class. We dove into the big names: Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors. We even got down to like Ricky Pearsall and then Roman Wilson somewhere at the end there. We're going to talk about some bigger names here in part 2 and some lesser known names in this wide receiver class, but we are starting with the Texas bros here, A.D. Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell, and Xavier Worthy. But I want to start on Mitchell first because he's a guy that you've seen a lot of at Georgia the prior years of his career. He finishes his career at Texas. And I'll just say this, from a high level, I came away pretty surprised with how I felt about him after charting his film based on some of these kind of like narratives you hear about him going into the process. So I'm curious where you are on A.D. Mitchell as a prospect.
Wait, is that negative or positive?
I want to hear how you feel first, and then I'll tell you if I'm with you.
I think he's good. I think that going to Texas was good for him. Because at Georgia, just with the way they were playing offense with Stetson Bennett at quarterback, that's, who was quarterback when he was there for the most part. I feel like they just kind of turned AD into a jump ball guy. He had 2 huge catches in the playoffs in back-to-back years when they were winning titles. And I just remember like he was a guy that people were pretty bummed to see go because didn't think he got the full experience of like how talented
Mm-hmm.
he was while he's at Georgia. But you know, he gets to Texas, and I think that it was good for him because you get to see more of the skill level that he has instead of just being a guy that goes down the field and gets to jump balls, which he can do. But I tend to think he's like pretty comfortably the best wide receiver prospect on Texas roster. And he's got a pretty complete game. I think he can play outside. I think his work on like in breakers is pretty special. We can get some momentum moving down the hill and kind of open up in the middle of the field. Yeah, I think, you know, does he have like real superstar, like number one wide receiver potential? I don't know, but I think he's a long-term starter in the NFL, which is probably worth like a first round pick.
I ended up really liking him a lot more than I thought
Yeah.
because number one, he's just cut from the pure X receiver cloth, right?
Yeah.
In his reception perception sample, 83% of his snaps sampled were outside. He was on the line of scrimmage on 82.8%. That was the highest rate in the class. Like, and this is a class that has a lot of true X receivers, right? And Rome Odunze and Marvin Harrison up at the top. Even Brian Thomas plays a lot of X receiver. But like, if you want to, which is weird, Charles, because I hate this Texas offense. Charting Mitchell and then Worthy back to back was not a fun couple of days for me because it's just like it's very gimmicky, it's very college football-ish, and I'm not trying to sound like a snob when I say this, but it just is what it is. This is not my brand of football. Watching on Sundays is fun, or Saturdays is fun. Watching it on film is kind of frustrating because shaky quarterback play, the like kind of half field reads, the gimmicky RPO stuff is just not, like I said, not really the brand of football I like, but weirdly, I say all that, and still I came away from A.D. Mitchell's film feeling like you get a lot of reps of him doing NFL receiver stuff. Like I said, on the line of scrimmage, tethered there, running like a vertical route tree, a true downfield route tree. But still, you also see, like you mentioned, his in-breaking routes are really nice, man. And, you know, he gets kind of, I'm curious what you think about this because obviously the biggest thing that people throw at him critique-wise is that, oh, he takes plays off or he loafs through his routes and stuff like that. Well, number one, you better keep that same energy for all these Texas receivers because all of them are doing it. Like, I never see people give Xavier Worthy a bunch of crap for that like they do with A.D. Mitchell. And maybe that's just, I don't know, his reputation generally. But Xavier Worthy's definitely doing it. Even like the last few plays of the game against Washington, like Xavier Worthy's over there on the other side of the field when they're throwing the ball to A.D. Mitchell, just kind of walking around. Like, I think that's just a Texas thing. And also I think some of it comes from the way A.D. Mitchell runs his routes. Like it's kind of like DeAndre Hopkins-ish where he's not going full speed and he's almost kind of trying to lull you to sleep before he really snaps in on the inside. So again, I don't really find that criticism to be fair, but he's not a perfect prospect. He's a little bit George Pickens-ish where he gets lost and like needs to get to his landmarks faster against zone coverage. But when he's just in like pure press man situations, I really came away very impressed with his route running.
Yeah, I think, you know, excuse me, like going to Texas and ending up with someone like Steve Sarkisian is probably pretty good for AD because, you know, you get to see him do some more NFL type thing. Sark, he coached with the Raiders way back in the day. He was the offensive coordinator for the Falcons a few years ago before he ended up back in college football. And yeah, the Texas wide receiver thing is funny because I do think it's probably a function of their offense. And I would say that because when, I don't remember who it was, someone pointed out on Twitter, a few Texas coaches got upset at, you know, people making remarks at how bad, you know, their effort was on the edge. So it kind of makes me think that they're being taught that. You know, and I mean, there are some like offenses like the Art Briles offense back in the day. Like I remember when Corey Coleman was having his draft discussions, people would be like, "Oh, why isn't he trying out there?" Because they're kind of coached not to, bro. Like they're in some of these air raid systems, like you'll run like four verts or mesh over and over again, and you'll run like 40 yards down the field, get that DB tired, and then run straight off to the sideline, and another wide receiver will come in, and they're just kind of, you know, doing that. Or you have guys who will, on one side of the play, if the ball's not supposed to go to that side of the play, they'll just stand there and do nothing. And
literally they'll like saunter out there like almost in the direction of what would be a slant route or a curl route, but like it really is like a trot or a saunter.
Yeah. So it's like sometimes when you see these bad habits, some of them are taught, and obviously in the NFL that won't fly. So I think you're just gonna have to wait and see what it looks like. But I would not really be concerned about like any real facet of like that being an issue. I think for him, I think he just needs to land with another guy who can be, a kind of a 1A to his 1B, or kind of split that duty. Because I think in the last mock that me and Nate did, we had a mock to Pittsburgh at pick 20. And I don't know, that kind of seemed like overkill, but they also just need the receiver talent in a pretty bad way.
I was going to say, that is kind of, like I said, that's very samey, because I see Pickens and AD Mitchell's, especially prospect profiles, I see them very similarly.
I do too. I think that one was just more like, oh, they have no one, so why not just take a swing, even if it is kind of the same thing that you already have. But yeah, he's probably a round one player. Like I said before, he's the Texas wide receiver that I would want to draft in this draft.
Put a pin in that one real quick, because I do want to come back to that idea of him versus Xavier Worthy before we fully dive into Xavier Worthy. But I think I heard Adam Schefter say, or I saw someone say that he said, good reporting and analysis here, that on the Establish the Run podcast or on their video page, that he thinks people are not even close in terms of the ballpark that AD Mitchell's going to go in. Like, he's going to go much higher in the draft based on the people that he's talked to than typically where he sees him mocked. And he sees him mocked like late round 1, early round 2. So I wonder if he could be like a really surprise name that jumps up there. And I get it, man. I also think he's like a fringe round 1, 2 prospect. He's in the same group to me with a lot of players that I really like. Overall, I came away, like I said, very impressed with the way he's a ball winner in the air. He's very comfortable winning the ball in traffic. He's very comfortable in man press situations as a route runner, both from an athleticism perspective and a technique perspective. He's not good after the catch. I don't really care. Like Charles, one of the takes I'm workshopping is that I think that we'd be better off as a society if we stopped giving a shit about yak numbers for vertical X receivers. Like, it doesn't really matter. That being said, like, you watch AD Mitchell run in the open field and you're like, I mean, he just doesn't look comfortable doing it. So depending on the offenses you run, not everybody's going to be comfortable with that. But if he does go in late round 1 to a team like the Bills or a team like the Chiefs, where they have some other viable, well, the Chiefs are complicated right now because of Rashee Rice, but they have viable target earners there that he doesn't have to be the guy right away, I think that's kind of the best position for him, but overall really like him. I wanted to double back on the thing you just said about you like him better than Xavier Worthy. I also like him better than Xavier Worthy, and we'll talk about Worthy here like in full, but how do you feel about the idea that, like, the immediate pushback to that is, well, last year on the field, from a statistical perspective, one guy was more productive than the other. How do you feel about kind of that counter argument to the idea that it makes no sense to rank Mitchell over Worthy?
I would say that watch the film. Watch the
right.
film.
Yeah, right. I don't want the response to be the meathead, like watch the film, or like even just
but sometimes that's what it has to
but
be. Yeah, no, watch the film and look at the weight. He's 160 pounds. This is a game for grown men. Like, it hurts to play football. You have to be strong to play football, and being fast is fine. But we've seen a lot of, like, having the fastest 40 ever is definitely an accomplishment, but we've seen a lot of fast guys in the NFL who maybe on the right day could hit a 4.21. And, not all of them turn out to be great NFL players. I just think with Worthy, the weight is just, it's a pretty big deterrent to me. And maybe that just speaks to, like, the kind of football players that I gravitate towards in scouting or, in personal preference. But if I'm an NFL team that's trying to, game plan for a team that features a lot of Xavier Worthy, like, we're just gonna put hands on you at the line of scrimmage, and if we get beat, that's fine, because in a straight line, not many guys are gonna keep up with him anyways. But in the timing of a play, like, I feel like sometimes when we think about 40 times and how they translate to the NFL, it kind of loses the context of, like, the structure of an offensive play and really just how long it takes. So, and we, like, the biggest culprit to me is, like, when we see this with, like, Senior Bowl routes. And you see someone who'll take, like, all right, we're 3 seconds into a route, or we're 4 seconds into a route and now we're open. Dude, quarterbacks
Braxton
already
Miller, the Braxton Miller one.
Senior Bowl. the quarterback's already moved on. And I don't think that Xavier Worthy's film is that like egregious, but in terms of the NFL, like this is about projection. Like if I put him against Sauce Gardner and Sauce Gardner can get his hands on him at the line of scrimmage, the 4-2, that's 4-2 don't matter because, someone who weighs 40 pounds more than him, got hands and feet on him. And that's the only thing that I worry about in the NFL as far as Worthy comes along. I don't think he's like the perfect receiving prospect, but just the size is a pretty big, thing for me to get over. And to use like a first round pick on a 160-pound player is kind of crazy to me. We just saw it last year with the Commanders and Emmanuel Forbes, and by the end of the season, like you can't even put him on the field. Because and I know it's different for defense because in defense you can really be targeted. Where it's like, all right, I'm running at you because my running back outweighs you by 60 pounds. But in the NFL, if you're going to have to manufacture,
or I'm just going to line up AJ Brown across from you every single time,
every single play, and we'll beat the crap out of you. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just going to be tough for him to make that transition, but maybe he can be fast enough where it doesn't matter. I've seen like some like earlier during the season, some like Tyreek Hill comparisons. Like, dude, even Tyreek Hill outweighs him by a good 25 pounds. So it's just going to be interesting to see like what his role ends up being in the NFL. Unless he's able to put on some serious weight.
Yeah, Scott Barrett from Fantasy Points put out the chart of like the fastest wide receivers in NFL combine history. There's 7 first-round picks. There's 19 day 2 picks here. There's only 1,000-yard receiver, and that was Santana Moss all the way back in the 2001 draft class. Now, I don't think that, like, you don't have to hit 1,000 yards to be considered like a successful NFL player. And there's some guys that you can caveat here, like John Ross is obviously the guy that people think about. But I do think with John Ross, like, we forget that the film was actually pretty good with John Ross. He just could never stay healthy. Maybe he was overdrafted by the Bengals at 9th overall, but still, I think he was a pretty quality football player. He just never could stay healthy. Henry Ruggs, obviously he's up there, but extenuating circumstances there. I look at this list, extenuating circumstances. I look at this list and I see names like Dree Archer. I see names like Archie's good turned out to be a pretty solid player. Yeah, Dree Archer, right? Jacoby Ford, even like Tyquan Thornton or like Jerome Mathis or JJ Nelson. And I do think that Xavier Worthy does, quote, real wide receiver things better than those guys. But he's still 165 pounds, and it would be one.
I was going to say, I think one thing that people also need to know for combine and, that weigh and stuff is when you're on that extreme of the pendulum, that's not really what you actually weigh usually. Like, I'm sure Xavier Worthy had to gain weight to get to 165 for the combine. Or when you see someone like T'Vondre Sweat at 366, he probably had to get down to 366.
Well, he didn't weigh in the Senior Bowl. Sweat didn't weigh in the Senior Bowl, which means he was probably like pushing 375 at the Senior. Yeah, well,
yeah.
I'm being nice. But I also, by the way, Charles, the inverse of that is true. That if Xavier Worthy is training for the NFL scouting combine, like people gave Marvin Harrison crap for not working out and saying like, I'm not training for a track event. I'm training to be a football wide receiver, like a great football player. But that's the truth of the matter. Like, you're training for this event at the scouting combine. You could also make the argument that if Xavier Worthy is training to break the 40-yard dash record, which clearly he wanted to do it, right? Because he had that crazy time and then he still went out and ran it again because he knows that, hey, I run this 4.21 or whatever, my stock is going to go up. You could also argue that if he's training to do that, he's probably actually dropping weight, which, okay, fine. Maybe he's 170 pounds, but then he's not 4.21 fast. So either way, it's like not real.
Yeah. And I don't know, with the little guys, it's always interesting. It can be tough to project that because I remember like watching Tavon Austin at West Virginia. It was the coolest like any of us had ever seen at the time because he made it look so easy. And then he gets to the NFL and it didn't translate. Even like when he had the ball in his hands, it just didn't translate. No. And quite honestly, like the crazy thing with Tavon Austin is like when he got to the NFL, he just stopped looking fast. Like he just didn't look fast anymore. So now it's just like, oh, you're just small. Everyone's fast here. Everyone's big and strong too. So I don't know. I think Xavier Worthy is still a good player to have, but the idea of taking him round 1 is absolutely insane to me. I don't know.
Yeah, and last thing on just the weight part of it, another comp, and I actually think from a skill set perspective, this is kind of a similar comp from things they struggle with and things they're good at. You know, Marquise Brown weighed at 168 pounds or whatever at the NFL scouting combine, but he was recovering from a serious injury, and that's why he didn't weigh in because he hadn't been working out. He was recovering from was it a toe injury or some sort of foot injury? And he actually told me prior to the combine, like, yeah, man, I haven't lifted weights in months, you know, because I can't do anything off my foot. Right. So he's a guy who does not play at 168 pounds. He's small, but he doesn't play at 168 pounds. So again, there's just a lot of questions with the weight part of it. And that brings me to kind of the on-field point of it. All this stuff shows up on tape, man. Like the lack of size shows up in the results. He's not good at the catch point. He's a net negative in contested situations. He goes down on first contact all the time. That's the thing where I watch Xavier Worthy at Texas and I think, man, he doesn't look 4.21 fast here, because if you get a hand on him, he's probably going down because he's smaller than everybody else. Like if he has a full clear runway, yeah, he can rip that big play and that's awesome. But if he doesn't have that and there's traffic around him, I think he struggles a little bit. And so again, goes down on first contact. And then the press coverage stuff, this is where I push back on the Tank Dell thing. Cause I guarantee you people are listening to this podcast right now, Tank Dell last year, 170 pounds or whatever, super small. And he ends up having a really nice rookie season. Well, number one, the Texans had to work him into situations where he could get free releases and stuff like that. And number two, Tank Dell in reception perception last year, 83rd percentile success rate versus press coverage, 73.9%. He showed an ability to play above that size. Xavier Worthy's a 28th percentile success rate versus press coverage player. He's fine against man coverage. He's fine against zone coverage when he can get those free releases. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm banging on Xavier Worthy too much because I do think he's a good prospect. And you take him in round 2, I totally understand that. But I just think from a translation standpoint, there's a lot of questions here.
Yeah. And really, these are problems I don't know if you can fix that. It probably caps what you can be, but he's still a useful player. I just think that he might end up in a situation where some team doesn't think about it enough and they just see the speed and go, "That's our first round receiver." I think even ending up in a situation like Buffalo, even if you're playing with Josh Allen, that'd be kind of tough because
oh my God,
you're the focal point, bro, of that offense.
Also, that's just so many guys that probably should play in the slot or off the ball. I like Kurt. I'm probably the world's biggest Curtis Samuel fan, and I've always been a proponent that Khalil Shakir should have been playing more the whole time. But those guys are slot receivers that should play off the ball. So I don't know. That's tough.
It's gonna be tough.
I even just think there are teams where he could get absolutely wasted. That being said, there are so many teams, Charles, that are doing these full speed motions at the snap, the pre-snap motions where, the cheat motions that Kyle Shanahan called them. That I can see Xavier Worthy working there, truly weaponizing that motion. I come back to the Packers all the time where they were throwing these guys like Amari Rodgers and even sometimes trying to get Aaron Jones on these motion plays. But these Amari Rodgers wasn't a good receiver. He could do cool. You did pre-snap motion stuff with him. They had a couple other guys that were kind of in that same ballpark, just weren't real receivers. And then you get Jaden Reed on the other end of that, and he's a real receiver. And suddenly that weaponizes that play so much. I do think Xavier Worthy in an offense like that could play that specific role. But again, that's hyper specific to be talking about a first round player.
Oh yeah. Yeah. You just can't build the whole play out of it.
Right.
Because, dude, I remember, I don't know if I talked about it on this pod or if it was another podcast. I'm just in front of a mic way too much. But last year, when Jory and I were covering Giants, OTAs and mini camps and stuff like that last summer, they were real excited about trading for Darren Waller and they felt good about their wide receiver room. And I was sitting there, it's should you guys feel good about this wide receiver room? I don't know. This is just all a bunch of guys who do the same thing, and need the same level of protection, which I think is a more important part than the skill sets overlapping. Yeah, I just think, Xavier Worthy, you're just gonna have to, you're gonna have to put him with a group that's already, got some guys built into it because I don't think he's going to be a guy that's like, all right, 140 targets for Xavier Worthy, and that's a core part of our offense. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, Charles and I both think he's a day 2 guy. It should go there. We don't want to double count the speed, which is, I think, probably what's going to happen by whoever the team that drafts him. Let's talk about another player here, Xavier Legette. Charles, Xavier Legette's yardage by season at South Carolina: 113 in 2020, 63 in 2021, 167 in 2022, 1,255 in his final year in 2023. You are not going to find many players that play at one school for 4 years that have a career like that. So this is a very unique profile. There's a lot of reasons as to why he never completely fired off at South Carolina until last year. I'm curious where you stand on him with that profile kind of in context and just also like what he is on the field, because I'm still like really struggling to kind of come down on a firm take of where I feel about Legette in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel. And I think at this point, we know that we've done enough research on all these guys where you can say it's pretty important to have more than just like one season where you're producing. Going back to Marvin Harrison, one of the most impressive things to me is, you have the rock star season with CJ Stroud, you get Common Core, and you come back and do the same thing, right? Like, there's no question about it. But with this, like you said, before you get to 2023, there's only 2 seasons where he had over 100 yards. 100, not 1,000, 100 yards. And honestly, like, when I watch him play, I do think he's a good player, but so much of his game, to me, revolves on I'm bigger, stronger, faster, and if we're going to keep it real, older than a lot of the players that we're playing against. This is a 5th-year guy. And I know that the COVID season, we're still sorting it out. There's a lot of guys who have been in the league for or have been in college football for longer than we're used to from, just everything pre-COVID. But still, this is like a 23-year-old guy playing against some guys who are still growing into their bodies. I would hope that with the physical skills you have, you could pull off a season like that. He did, to his credit. But I still think it's fair to ask, like, what was the roadblock here? Because it's also not like South Carolina is one of these programs like Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama where I might be sitting behind 3 NFL receivers in front of me and there's not much that I can do about it. This is someone that probably should have been playing for South Carolina well before it got to this point, because they haven't put any guys in the league at wide receiver. So what's been going on with you?
Yeah. And again, there's a lot of like context in his journey. He's a guy who I think he's lost both of his parents. He was in like a serious motorcycle accident. So there's been stuff going on with him that maybe you can start to explain some of this away. But at the same time, it's 4 years of college, all that stuff. I think just even when you look at the film this year, it would be one thing where I'd be ready and willing to like go full throated. I love Legette. Doesn't matter about the profile stuff if the film was completely clean, but it's not, man. Like I go one game and being like, this is not for me. Like this is just not what I think translates to the NFL. Then there's other film where I'm like, man, I love this guy. Like I think he's great. So that volatility, like this is a guy who's 23 years old. He's been in college this long and he's still a developing college player, not a developing NFL player. So now like you get that to the league and then you have to start asking all these questions again about what's the growth trajectory. And he's not like a Keon Coleman type where we talked about last episode where, okay, he's not a consistent separator against man press coverage, but I want to move him into the slot and like let him go to work there. I think you want a guy like Xavier Legette who's 6'1", 220 pounds and runs a 4.39 with a 40-inch vertical. You want him lining up on the outside. You want that to be an outside receiver. It's just, again, he's very linear. He's very straight line. Like I don't think working back to the football is a strength of his. So I can see where he can be deployed and I can see where there's upside there. it just depends on where you take him to me. Like I've seen mocks where he goes in the late first round. That's aggressive for me.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy. But again, another guy that if you take him on day 2 and you have other players in the room to work around him, I do love how he approaches the game. Like he's a badass, man. He's very physical. He likes to, he gets involved in the run game. He's great after the catch. I can see him being a threat on screenplays and yak stuff like that. So again, this is the type of profile that game by game, series by series, I go very back and forth on.
Yeah, I guess the name that I don't think it's a 1-for-1 comparison, but the name that kept popping into my head when I was watching him was Josh Gordon. And you even go back to like Josh Gordon at Baylor. Like he was doing that stuff as a 20-year-old, a 19-year-old. Because he was 21. He had just turned 21 when his first season started in the NFL. There's no real question of like, there were never really any talent questions or concerns in that regard for Josh Gordon. And he was getting on the field with guys like Terrence Marshall was a Baylor Bear, Kendall Wright was a Baylor Bear during their season. So the production profile for me is so difficult to wrap my head around. But you watch him play and it's like, dude, if this thing works out, like this is a real deal X receiver who could do a whole lot of things and like punish people after the catch. I think day 2 is a fine dice roll for him. I would even feel fine, like, because I don't know if I'm really that high on like that second tier of wide receivers. Like I obviously love the top 3 with Marvin, Neighbors, O'Dunes. I really like AD Mitchell, but once you kind of get past that, I think a lot of these guys are just dart throws. And if you're sitting there mid-second round, late second round, early third round, he's still on the board. There have been worse bets than someone like Xavier Legette.
You compared him to Josh Gordon. Josh Gordon led the NFL with 1,646 yards at 22 years old, which is younger than Xavier Legette is as he enters the NFL, which is pretty crazy. I'm with you that once you get past this, and this is a good thing to remember with this entire receiver class, which we are talking about the strength of this receiver class, and there's a lot of names we can just rip off that have they're all the reason in the world to be day 2 draft picks, which is why I'm so terrified that there's going to be somebody that I haven't even set eyes on that goes in the 3rd round, and I'm going to freak out about it. But like once you get past the guys I really like in this class, the top 3, you get past Brian Thomas, you get past AD Mitchell, you get past like Ricky Pearsall and Ladd McConkey. I do sort of start to think like, all right, throw these guys sort of in a hat and just pick your flavor. And if you do want that physical X receiver and you think you can develop Xavier Legette, like that's the thing. You have confidence in your receiver coach. You have confidence in your room to develop this guy. Like, I don't want to see him go to the Giants or something. They need an X receiver, but like he's going to have to play right away. Like I want him behind some other target earners and stuff like that. But then we're going to get to year 2 in his career. He's going to be 25 years old, So he's just a very complicated evaluation. The profile and the film together makes it a very complicated evaluation. Next guy I want to hear your opinion on is Troy Franklin out of Oregon. He seems to be a darling of production-based dynasty Twitters. Like kind of flair at this point because he's young. He's been productive at Oregon. He's another guy that like not even game by game. Honestly, like route by route, I feel totally different about Troy Franklin. So how do you feel about him?
I mean, can I get him on the phone with Barry Bonds? Or, any of these other guys who were raking in the 90s. Like, that's all. To me, that's what he's really missing. You're 6'3". Why are you 175, bro? Like,
yeah, right.
I don't know. And I think so much of his game is smooth. I really did enjoy watching him play for the most part. Just, man, I think you can see the areas in this game where, like, a lack of just, I don't know, body mass kind of hurts him a little bit. But, he's young. It's crazy because I remember last week I was looking at his bio and it said he was born in 2003. And I was like, ooh.
Yeah, dude. No, don't look at that stuff.
I was like, ooh, because I didn't know how old he was, because I feel like, you got to look now. College football, their guys have been there for 8 years, like literally. So he's still a young guy, and I think he's got the frame really to put on more weight. Because when you're that tall, you're that long for body brain, but yeah, for lack of a better phrasing, you should be able to get into the gym and put on some pounds. So I kind of view him more as like a little bit of a project, not from a skills perspective, but just like from a physical perspective. But like if he can start to hit like just some of these development benchmarks and quite literally just grow into his body, I think he could actually be a pretty, serviceable. I think is kind of underselling it, but a capable player. I don't know if you can start him off at X against NFL cornerbacks. I'm not sure how that will go for him. But I do think he's got some skill to even make some things work for himself as he gets stronger. The work against press is maybe a little inconsistent, but I still do see like a pathway for him to be, a weapon there in the NFL. I think the more I think about it and I talk about it, I like his game. I like the way he works on the outside. It's just, man, can you get a little stronger for me, pal? Can you get to 190?
Yeah. I really like him as a route runner. I think he paces his routes well. Like I really like his footwork, but he's just weak. Like he's small. And that is so frustrating because
at least he's tall,
he's tall. And he's fascinating just because, like I said, at times and I'm charting this, right? Like I'm charting whether he's open or not. There are times when I'm like, oh, he's about to win this route. And then he doesn't, right? And like that's frustrating because I think it's mostly a physical issue because I think the technique is there. Like I think his footwork is there. I think the timing and rhythm of his routes are really good. And I agree with you. I don't think you're throwing him out there at X receiver in year one. But that's what he did at college. He was an outside receiver. He's mostly on the line of scrimmage, a pure perimeter guy. And like I really like that profile. It's just the size shows up, and like anytime he's working over the middle, it's a real dice roll, right? As to like how comfortable he's going to be because he's so lean. It's actually not dissimilar, but I like him better as a technician than the player I'm about to compare him to. And I also like he played a real kind of like you watch it and it's an NFL role, but it's really not too dissimilar to Jalen Hyatt last year, where he's a skinny guy. Jalen Hyatt was 176 pounds at the combine. And you think, man, this guy's about to fly. He runs a 4.4 in the 40-yard dash. Same thing with Troy Franklin. He's skinny. You're like, oh, this guy's about to fly. He runs like a 4.41. So again, I think those profiles are kind of similar. They also both have, really brutal moments with their hands. That's another thing we haven't talked about with Troy Franklin yet is like, he clearly does not trust his hands, which is a problem because that's another layer of development we're having to put on here. But again, Jalen Hyatt as a first round pick, no, thank you. That was not for me. But then in the third round, okay, I understand you taking that risk here, and I like Troy Franklin better than that. Like I don't see him as this top 5 wide receiver prospect that some people in the dynasty community do. But I do see him as a solid developmental round 2 pick because he shows way better flashes as a route runner, especially outside, than Jalen Hyatt did. But yeah, I didn't actually think about that until we were talking this through, but those just like on paper profiles kind of line up to me.
Yeah. Like I said, if you can just get Barry on the phone.
Gain 20 pounds one
gain
way or
20
another.
Pounds, man. Hey, I at least like the reason why I'm optimistic for him though is because he's got the frame to do it. I don't know. You look at some of these guys and you're just like, obviously, if you, I want to say like if you commit to this, I don't want to insinuate that like he's not working out, but like if you really commit to this and get in the gym and eat, like I don't think that like he would even lose that much athleticism just because like he's got so much like room to add muscle. It's not really an Xavier worthy situation where I would worry, all right, like if you get up to like 180, how bad is that hurting your speed? When you're 6'2.5", 6'3", the game's a little bit different for you. So I do think he's a little bit landing spot dependent, but I would even understand it if you're Buffalo and you're sitting there at 28 and you're like, hey, this might be rough year one, but year 2 and year 3 and moving forward down the line, we kind of feel like this could be something. I don't think that that's a terrible investment to make.
I think I can get behind that. It's definitely going to be ahead of where I actually sit here and rank him.
Right.
But the fact that he's 21 years old, the fact that he's 6'2", the fact that he shows real understanding of how to run routes and how to get open, I do understand that. And
because the basis of this is he's a good football player.
Right.
Know?
Yeah. He's clearly a good football player. Although the hands are suspect. Like that is another part of this too, where I'm willing to live with drops. Totally. I've always been willing to live with drops.
When it's within my rooting interest, then I get upset.
Of course, yeah. Really if it's going to affect like my sports betting takes or something like that, yeah, no, then it's upsetting. But yeah, right. But just last point on this, like 3 years from now, you tell me Troy Franklin is one of the 5 most productive receivers from this draft class. I could believe it. You tell me that he gets drafted by some team that says, okay, we're going to put him on the bench in year 1. Maybe he gets on the field a couple times and gets muscled around by stronger guys and drops a few critical passes or whatever. The whole coaching staff gets fired, and by year 3 he's cut because a new group comes in and they're like, yeah, we're not invested in developing this 176-pound kid. I can also see that happening. So he's a very wide range of outcomes prospect to me, but good player. I do think he's a good player, and it's just going to be interesting to see what happens to him in the NFL. All right, let's talk about the next guy here, Javon Baker, who after we get past the Brian Thomases and the A.D. Mitchell X receivers in this class, I think Javon Baker is kind of the next up there in terms of just pure X's. Not my next ranked guy or anything. There are some real big Javon Baker bros on the internet. I have noticed that. I'm kind of a little mixed on Javon Baker. I think he's a good player. He runs some interesting routes. He's a pretty good downfield receiver. Charles, my general take on him is that he's kind of what people wanted Gabe Davis to be, which I know, like I say Gabe Davis and that's like, oh, Gabe Davis, we don't like Gabe Davis. But if you think about Gabe Davis, day 3 draft pick, that's a pretty big success. If you think about Gabe Davis, like top 20 drafted fantasy receivers, because he's scored 4 touchdowns in a playoff game, and then the Bills kind of overrated that. Yeah, that seems bad. But again, in context, like if you draft Gabe Davis and he's on a rookie contract, that seems fine to me.
Yeah, it's all about context. Like, Gabe gets a lot of hate, and I understand, like, when you exist where the Bills were and you've been good, the expectations rise when you feel like you can win a Super Bowl. But even a 4th-round pick, he was absolutely a hit, Absolutely a hit. And I think this is where, you start getting to like this portion of the draft. I think, and you've talked about a lot in the past, like the idea of a trump card. Like, what's one thing you're really good at that we can harness in a specialized role? Because, Gabe Davis got a lot of flaws, but I know Gabe can get down the floor, get down the field in a hurry, and punish you deep, but he might not catch it when it gets there. But still, just the idea that you can be in those positions is a valuable skill to have. So, yeah, it is. Is there one thing that you're good at that we can harness to pick you, in round 4 or round 5, where you can still be a valuable part of this offense as you kind of get up to speed on what it's like to be an NFL player?
Yeah, I like him as a guy that you just develop a little bit and kind of get him to slow down almost sometimes, because I think he's got like kind of a herky-jerky route running style that can look really good if you put it on a cut up. But when you watch it consistently over routes, like there are times where he kind of overruns things. There are times where he is a little too dramatic and just like, hey, that ends up actually getting him tangled up a little bit with some better cornerbacks, some more disciplined cornerbacks. I see him as a guy that you kind of want to just develop, because I think he's got pretty good football instincts, right? Like when I watch him, I'm like, that's a good receiver. I see the makings of a good receiver here. So again, once you get past you miss out on the Brian Thomases, you miss out on the A.D. Mitchells, I think you look at Javon Baker as a guy that could get developed a little bit and maybe potentially be that starting X for you a few years down the line. Next guy up is Malachi Corley, who calls himself the Yak King. He was just on Twitter the other day, quote tweeting Field Yates, who said, yeah, Malachi Corley is visiting this team, 2nd most broken tackles in the FBS last year, I think, or something. I'm butchering it, but whatever. And he quotes me, he's like, I don't know who broke more tackles than me, but like, shout out to them. That's a lot. So we know what his trump card is, Charles. But my question to you is, what skills are there beyond just the ability to break tackles in space?
You know, I think he works kind of well. And like, that's the big thing. Like, that's the one thing that gets me excited, right? And you know, there have been some like, you know, obviously some Debo comps because this is the name that we come back to all the time. But Debo is as strong as some of these defensive linemen, so I don't think that that's fair, really, to put on anyone. Because I mean, we've seen linebackers get hit by Debo and they go flying. I don't think that that's true of Corley or really any other receiver in the NFL besides Debo Samuel. But you know, I like the idea of Corley in like a Shanahan type offense where you can take advantage of if you can just open up the middle of the field. Like, I do think he gets down the field, hits these inbreakers in a hurry, and that's when he's scary. Like, if you can get him in stride, like they do with Brandon Ayuk, like they do with Debo Samuel and some of the other guys, and get the ball in his hands downhill, that's where he's most exciting to me. As far as like his other skills, I don't know. I'm not really too like big on him, like as the idea of like an X receiver that's going to beat press and win with releases and stuff like that. But you know, if you can find him in an offense where like in Kyle Shanahan's offense, you know, you can't always play man because they're going to run crossers, right? And you're going to have to sit in zone. And maybe if you can find an offense where he can sit in zone and find some of these spots and use that ability to accelerate, that's where he's kind of special. Because, dude, you know, 215 running a 4.4. That's a big dude to take down in the open field. Mm-hmm. I just think like with his skill set that he has right now, it's just going to need some manufacturing, you know, at the next level.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think that's kind of how I feel. And I will say this, though. He is not Debo Samuel, but he's much farther along as a real receiver than like the Rondale Moore types or whatever. Like, I think he shows you a real good understanding of zone coverage that like a Rondale Moore did not. Like, to maybe become just a legitimate slot receiver beyond, you know, the yak stuff. Now, a lot of his routes are slants. A lot of his routes are just that kind of like gimme stuff over the middle of the field. So some of the zone coverage success rates might be boosted because of that. But I do think he's a guy that can fill a hyper specific role. So he's going to be very landing spot dependent. He's not going to be the type of guy that every team wants to draft. All right. Coming down to the end of it here, I want to just throw out like kind of rapid fire options here at you, Charles. I've got Jalen Polk. I've got Jalen McMillan. I've got Brendan Rice, Jermaine Burton, Malik Washington. Any of those names you feel strongly about as players?
I really like Jermaine Burton. He's I think he's a talented player, and I honestly I think he's a good player. I don't think he ever had the volume or quarterback situation to make use of his skill set, because you know Jalen Milroe is obviously a really good college player, really exciting. Not the most accurate thrower, not the greatest thrower, but I still think when you watch Burton's film, there's a lot on tape. I don't know. You might have to ask around and ask like why people at Georgia and Alabama might not be too fond of him.
Well, there's off-field stuff, right?
There's off-field stuff. Yeah. I mean, honestly, just from watching him play, he kind of seems like a prick. I find it entertaining. I don't know him though, so we'll see what happens with that. But you know, on the field, I think he's someone who could develop into just like a classic wide receiver too, where you know it's not the most explosive thing, not the flashiest thing, but he just kind of gets open and figures out how to make big plays. So you know, depending on how teams feel about his comfortable or how comfortable teams feel about his character, yeah, he's a guy that could make some noise on like day 3 or day 2 and have a pretty solid rookie year.
Yeah, I could see him going on day 3 just because of the off-field stuff and some of the concerns there. But route running's really good, man.
Yeah, he's a good player, dude.
Yeah, he's a good player, and he tracks the ball really well down the field too. I've seen Kenny Stills comps. I see like some early John Brown in him as well. Like you just fling that ball down the field, and he's got a great sense of how to track it and win in the vertical route tree. I could see him being a speed slot. I can see him being an off-ball like flanker receiver. I'm really high on him as a player. I think he can be a very good receiver. Yeah, he could be a top 10 ranked receiver in this draft class just on his ability.
He plays with no fear. Yeah. The switching gears to like Brendan Rice, the Jerry Rice's son from USC. It's funny because you see, I've seen like this style of tweet a couple times this draft season where someone will say, "Oh, if you take Marvin Harrison's name off of him and name him, Michael Smith, would you still feel like he's the top receiver in the draft?" And someone was like, Jerry Rice's son is literally in this draft class.
Yeah,
he gives a crap. Like,
yeah, he's like a day 3 draft pick.
Yeah. And then, when Caleb Williams was tweeting yesterday or the day before about not facing adversity in his football life, I'm like, he was throwing at Brendan Rice, so I don't know.
That was incredible that he said, yeah, my adversity was we weren't that good my last year in college, which like you never really see
that. You don't have to say that.
Yeah, you really never see a quarterback say that, which talk about stuff I'm tired of talking about. I'm tired of talking about Caleb Williams and anything that has to do with him other than being a football player. But well, I'm not talking about it. I'm tired of you freaks out there talking about it.
That's right.
But I mean, it is a little weird to be like, yeah, the adversity was that we were kind of disappointing on the field. But yeah, you watched that offense last year, and it's beyond the offensive line, which I think was the biggest problem. The receiver play was certainly not as good as it was with Jordan Addison there the last year.
Yeah. So that's really all there is to say about Brendan Rice. I feel like maybe he can carve out like a little backup X role somewhere. I don't know.
Last guy I've got notes on here. I don't have much on the 2 Washington guys. I haven't actually started them. I need to chart them. And I'm interested because people do seem to like them. I'm curious what you think about them, but I really like Malik Washington. He's not a guy that you see run the full route tree. I get that. But another player that I think understands space and I mean, super flexible. You see him in very limited looks be able to beat man coverage. I just could see him end up being like a very solid player in the NFL. Is he a guy that is ever going to, catch 120 balls or something like that, or he's going to catch a bunch of touchdowns? Maybe not, but I can see him be a very quality player in the NFL. So, he's not the biggest guy, but really great hands. I mean, catches everything, good ball skills overall. I definitely think he makes for a nice sleeper in this class.
Yeah, he's a nice sleeper. I've had a few scouting buddies come back and say that that's someone that they've really liked watching this year, and he's had a journey too because he's transferred a couple times, but I think like the Malik Washington story is kind of just like, all right, well, if you end up with just a quality quarterback in college, because he got to play with Brennan Armstrong, who is not really like an NFL prospect, but still was. I'm pretty sure that was a quarterback last year, who maybe not like a pro prospect, but still someone who's pretty quality as far as college goes. That can kind of give you opportunities to show it, and maybe where you weren't your previous stops. So. Because I remember on the exempt list, I was talking with Jordan Reed about Malik Washington, and we kind of talked more about how the transfer portal has given some guys some new opportunities, and he's one of them. And you get to see that, like, oh, this guy actually has NFL skills. He's kind of need to get into an environment where it can flourish.
Yeah, apparently when he transferred to UVA last year, they were just like, yeah, we're going to build the whole offense out of you, which is pretty crazy because he was a guy at Northwestern that, solid, but never really was like that type of guy. But then he goes there, 1,700 all-purpose yards, 9 touchdowns, pretty crazy stuff. So led the FBS with a school record 110 catches. So shout out to UVA product Malik Washington. I'm excited to see where he ends up, and the right spot I think would be good for him. Do you have anything on the two receiving options at Washington beyond Roma Dunze? Like I said, Polk and McMillan, because those are two guys I still have not started working on yet.
Polk, like I don't know if these guys are ever like how fantasy relevant they'll be in the NFL, but I do think you'll enjoy watching them. Polk to me is a lot of fun just because I saw this morning on Twitter, our colleague Nate Tice compared him to Robert Woods. He's just, for lack of a word, just kind of a son of a bitch out there, man. Just really tough. Will do all the dirty work. He'll block. He'll make catches in the slot. And he's also like, for a slot receiver, he's a little bigger than they normally come. So I'm a pretty big fan of his game. Like, just as someone who enjoys the spectacle of wide receivers trying to put people in the dirt, I think he's a good watch. And McMillan, I kind of view him as like a wide receiver 3 type in the NFL. But dude, this is all on one team. O'Dunes, Polk, McMillan, and they all got their chances to shine. So I'm really excited to see where Polk ends up in the NFL, and McMillan, to another degree. Just because, like, usually when you start, digging into wide receiver groups that are this talented, like when you get past like the Alabama, Ohio State nonsense where they're just stacking 5 stars every year, sometimes you find guys where it's like, okay, you're kind of just benefiting because you're playing with some other talented guys. Like when AJ Brown and DK Metcalf were at Ole Miss, there was a third receiver, DeMarcus Lodge, who ended up having like almost 1,000 yards for them too. And you get to the NFL, it's like, oh, that's just because you were playing with those guys. But I think with McMillan and Polk, like, these guys actually have some real NFL chops in their own right. And, like I said, I don't know how fancy relevant they'll be every year, but good, skilled, quality football players.
A lot of receivers like that in this draft class, but these are the two guys that we previewed in part 1 and part 2 that we think kind of have the best chance to make some noise in the NFL. Of course, there will be other names. Hopefully I can chart them at some point. But Charles, appreciate you doing this, man. Receiver is a big part of this year's class. We've only got one more of these episodes left, buddy, before draft night, where we're going to preview the tight end and offensive line class this year. So you will definitely be carrying the heavy load on that one, buddy. The real football players. Yeah,
to me, there's really only like 1, maybe 2 tight ends this year that kind of matter. Yeah. So
that's why we're pushing 2 position groups into one podcast.
Yeah. And hey, at least we get to do more Georgia football propaganda next week. So that's a good one.
Well, that's all that Charles McDonald really cares about. That is going to do it for us today. We are back on Monday with big fish. NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah is going to join the show for our latest installment of Mock Draft Mondays. That's going to be epic. Until then, we're out.